that he's a top 15 wide receiver as long as Deebo Samuel's going out. And I'll do a bold prediction for Ayuk next week. Next week he plays the Rams. I believe that he will have 8+ catches and 100 yards on the day next week.
I need him to be, because Naku is now on the IR as well. I lost him, and now I'm losing Pacheco too. So
Yep.
I'm hard up. Didn't have a whole lot of depth to begin with.
No, not in this league. We have a lot of spots. We start 3 wide receivers, not a lot of margin for error. But like I said, 8 plus catches, 100 yards next week. He should be over that 90% snap count next week. So I think that better days ahead for Brandon Ayuk just because of the opportunities that he's going to get.
You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast, hosted by Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast with your host Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. Pat back from his second week hiatus, so I was glad to be back so I don't have to do that ever again.
And so I don't have to listen to you do that by yourself again?
Well, maybe if you like the production value of this podcast, you should show up when asked. How about that?
Yeah. Put the ratings on my shoulder. I will if I need to. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, going into week 3 now, we're getting a little idea of who's the teams to beat, who are the disappointing teams. But we're going to go over every single team, every single matchup like we do. Pat, I say this every week. I didn't say it last week, but this week, anything that caught your eye around the NFL in week 3?
Some surprising results, some upsets. Bengals are 0-3, Steelers are 3-0. We're kind of middling in between at this point in time. But no, I think the tight end issue is still a problem. That would be my biggest, 1 week, whatever, 2 weeks, okay, you start to look out if this is going to become a trend. 3 weeks for a lot of these guys. Some guys that have not produced at all. Mark Andrews, number 1 on that list, starting to get panicked about a lot of these guys. And, we'll get into it, but I'm sitting there with Pat Freiermuth as the 9th tight end, scoring 4 or 5 points every week. So it's rough at the tight end position.
Yeah, a lot of the teams, especially in our league, drafted tight ends early and often, but it really hasn't paid out for really anybody, really. I would guess Mike Gesicki had the really nice game this week, but he was drafted middle of the board. So the high-end tight end drafting has not worked out so far, but like Pat said, we'll get into it shortly. So let's go over to our first matchup of week 3, and that would be Patrick's Westminster Warbirds against the Cockeysville Cox, 150.06 to 109.18. The high score of the week for Pat, now 3-0 on the season. Let's start with Joe Burrow in their loss against Washington. 29 for 38, 324, 3 touchdown passes, 25.36 points. So a really nice bounce back week for Joe Burrow. First couple weeks, kind of subpar, 8 and 17. So good to see him get back on track. Kyron Williams, 24 carries, 89 yards, and a touchdown. Also gets a touchdown through the air in their win against San Francisco, 30 points on the day. James Cook, 11 for 39. Not much doing on the ground, but does get in the end zone and is involved in the passing game as well. Rashid Rice, 12 for 14, 14 targets. That's a massive workload. 110 yards and a touchdown for a 23-point day. And Chua Hubbard, 21 carries in that revamped Carolina offense, it seems now, 21 carries, 114 yards. Also gets involved in the passing game, 55 yards and a receiving touchdown from the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton. So 150 this week, Pat. 3-0. What are your thoughts through the first 3 weeks for your squad?
Well, generally pretty happy. This was a close matchup. I think two of the teams that I rated the highest in our draft recap, my team versus the Coxville Cox. And I think there's a lot of good that I saw this week and in these first 3 weeks. First of all, this is the matchup between Burrow and Kyler, the quarterback that I took versus the quarterback you thought I should take. Burrow comes out on top in this one. Nice to see that in primetime, Burrow 25 fantasy points. And then the other story is just other guys that are scoring mid to high double digits, late 10s, early 2s for James Cook, 16 fantasy points. Ray Rice.
You're about to say Ray Rice.
Rashee Rice, not a wife beater as so far that we know.
No, just speeds and races, and he gets in fights too, just not with women.
Right. That's what it is. Marginally better, I guess you could say. But 23 fantasy points used, 12 of 14. They were using him like a wide receiver plus Kelsey all in one package for Rashee Rice. He undoubtedly, that's a guy I want to talk to you a little bit more, Adam, about in a few minutes. But I think 23 fantasy points, wasn't necessarily expecting that much volume there, but he certainly delivered. And then Chuba Hubbard, who was a late addition, I think, on Saturday night, to get him in there against the Raiders with Dalton starting, hoping that offense could kind of turn itself around, and it certainly did. Hubbard, a big part of that, 21 carries on the ground and 5 receptions, 5 for 5 for 55 yards and a touchdown through the air. Like, suddenly that's a player who I was totally down on after the first 2 weeks, a guy that I thought I got a steal in the draft with him late, and then that offense just completely tanked. But Hubbard and that offense certainly looks revived in this one. So overall, pretty happy. Not a lot going on the bench right now, except for Bucky Irving and his continued march toward more volume. We'll see how that results, but generally pretty happy after 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really nice call I wouldn't, maybe not a really nice call because he did score more, but I mean, Jalen Waddle now with who knows at quarterback. I know Skylar Thompson is also hurt as well. It could be Tyler Huntley, the Baltimore savant of playoff years.
Snoop.
Go ahead.
No, Snoop. I was saying
Snoop. Okay. Yeah, he might be starting this week, so how does that affect Jalen Waddle's value? You already have A.J. Brown out for a couple of weeks. But, you have Rashee Rice. Calvin Ridley's probably going to have better days ahead. And Demarcus Robinson, you would think, would have more targets than this. Usually when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are out, he is the third option, or really the top option when they are out. So don't really understand what happened there, but better days ahead for them. And it just shows you the depth that you have on your roster, and with Jonathan Brooks coming back in 2 weeks, he's more talented than Chuba Hubbard. So if that Carolina offense continues to show progress, he could be a nice piece for you going down the line.
Yeah, let me ask you before we move on Rashee Rice. If you were drafting today, what number wide receiver would he be off your board? And then we'll figure out what round that'll be.
Well, okay, so we can do this easily, right? We can look at the draft results from this year.
Because I believe I got him in the 5th or 6th, 5th maybe?
Well, we can just go by wide receivers drafted ahead of him, and we can see where we stopped. So,
yeah.
So Tyreek Hill. So do you want to do this, or do you want me to do this?
I want you to do it.
Okay. So, do you want to list out the names, or do you want to pull it up real quick, or?
Yeah, I can pull them up. Right. So he went in the. Let's see. I took him in the 6th round.
Yep.
So we're going backwards, and you're saying receivers that you would want Ray Rice over.
Rashee Rice, but yeah.
This I said Ray Rice again. My God.
Yeah,
What
you
has
take a
gotten
week
into
off,
me?
you start to lose your
I'm
little edge there,
a
aren't
little
you?
rusty. I'm a little rusty, that's for
Yeah, we
sure.
can just go through the first 2 rounds of wide receivers, and we can talk about each of those and who I'd rather have.
Well, I guess I'm going to start in groups and just we're going to go backwards. So like you'd want Rasheed Rice over Tank Dell, Higgins, Pickens, and Kirk. Those are the other
I mean,
guys taken in
obvious,
his range, right?
obviously. Yep.
Okay. Go back into the fifth round. Devontae Smith.
Yes.
Yeah. Zay Flowers.
Yes.
Amari Cooper.
Yes.
Michael Pittman.
Yes.
This one's tricky and probably also a mover upper.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know him very well, Malik Neighbors. Your
That's.
fan.
I would probably rather have Rice just because it's a more confident offense.
Okay.
But it's
All
pretty
right.
close.
These guys are all affected by injury, Cup and Waddle, so you
Yeah.
want them over those guys. Moore and Metcalf.
Moore and Metcalf. Yep, both of those.
Diggs.
Yep, over Diggs.
Okay, so that gets us into the third round.
Yep.
Ayuk,
Yes.
Nico Collins.
Yes.
Ooh, that was a quick yes on Nico. Devontae Adams.
Yes.
Okay, middle of the third, Debo Samuel.
I mean, this is going to be a minute, but yes, I'd rather have him over him.
Taking, yeah, Mike Evans.
Yes.
Puka Nakua, hurt,
Yep.
obviously. Garrett Wilson.
Yes.
Drake London.
Yes. Even though I was high on Drake London.
Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yes. It's closer though. That's also a close one.
Chris Olave.
Yes.
Okay, we're in the first.
Mm-hmm.
We're AJ Brown.
I'd rather have Rice over Brown, and that's where it stops. I think
And
I'd
I've got
rather
them
have
both.
Amon-Ra over Rasheed Rice.
Oh, sorry. That was AJ. Oh, AJ.
Yeah, AJ
So
Brown.
you're stopping it at about AJ Brown and Mon-Ra St. Brown.
Correct.
Okay.
I think he
So
should
that's
be
like
around
six.
like the drafting if you're doing it again, that Puka Nakua, Garrett Wilson range. Assuming everyone's
Okay.
healthy. Yeah.
And I still think you'd want Jefferson, Chase, and Lamb,
Correct. Yeah, after that I want everyone else before.
including Tyreek.
I'm gonna say
Hill or
yes
Rice?
for right now.
Hill for right now.
I believe in Hill. Tua's had injury problems, throughout his career, and he hasn't really missed a step. I know that this week it wasn't a very good week, but he always seems to kind of figure it out. They move him around, they put him in the slot. The Miami offense runs through him, and I feel like the Miami's going to be trailing a lot more than what the Chiefs are. So his usage should be higher in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, he's a first-round pick, probably. First or early second-round pick now. Yep. All right. Let's get back here. So let's go over to the losing side. That'd be Brian, now 2-1, 109.18. Looking down his roster, Kyler Murray, up and down, really. 14 points in the first week, 28 in the second, and 14 again in the third week. He should have a good matchup against Washington. Joe Burrow just really threw against. Josh Jacobs, nothing doing. Tennessee has a pretty good run defense, so maybe kind of, I don't know, not surprising, but kind of surprising that he only has 14 carries and a win. Kind of weird there. Jerome Ford, 10 carries, 37 yards, nothing really doing against the Giants. Should have done more. That Browns offense just, I don't know, like, you have no idea who's going to be the guy week in and week out. They seem so discombobulated. It's hard to trust really anyone on that offense right now. Jamar Chase with the big night on Monday, 6 for 7, 118 and 2 touchdowns. Amari Cooper, also 2 touchdowns. Talking about Browns, he's had the big week this week for their offense after having 2 straight weeks of 2 points. Rashid Rice, I said Rashid Rice. Rashid Shaheed, nothing burger here, 0 points, 0 for 5. Was 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts, a golden sombrero. He went 0 for 5. Jake Ferguson, 6 for 11, talking about tight ends. Actually has a pretty good day here. 95 yards against Baltimore. Brian Robinson, not very efficient, but does get in the end zone, saves his day there. And then looking on his bench, Jawan Jennings, 11 for 12, 175 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the board. My question for you is, Jennings, if Debo is going to continue to be out, what ranking is he week in and week out in terms of wide receivers? Like, where do you put him?
Like in the context of this team, like
No, just like weekly rankings. If we're doing weekly rankings for all the wide receivers,
well,
where would he be?
I don't even ever think about that.
Okay.
I don't know. To me, it's so. What are they saying about Debo? When will he be back?
I think it's going to be a little bit, like 4 weeks. He's not on IR though, so it could be sooner than that.
I mean, you're probably looking at him as a middle of the road flex play. I think like a wide receiver 3 in our league with starting 3 wideouts. I mean, I don't want to overreact to one game. He certainly seems talented, but let's remember that Ayuk, who was just paid a lot of money, there's no way that they'll let him continue going through the season, especially in weeks without Deebo Samuel, where they aren't trying to at least feature him and get him involved and get their money's worth. So I think still like a wide receiver 3, no
Okay.
more than that.
Yeah, so I mean, you're starting him over Shaheed, aren't you? You think?
I think for next week you probably have to. I mean, Shaheed really started out hot off the gate. That Saints offense that we thought was really incredible and unique after 2 weeks. He puts up a dud over 5. So, and he had his most snap percentage of all 3 weeks. So, it's a mystery to me which team, Jekyll or Hyde, what Saints team this really is.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of who was that Saints wide receiver that always used to catch like long balls, and like
Oh my God!
what was it? It wasn't Ted Ginn. It was another
Well,
guy.
it was Cooks for a while.
Cooks.
It was Brandon Cooks for a little while.
Wow, did Brandon Cooks really play for the Saints?
I think so.
I don't. There's another player. I'll think of it, but yeah, he seems just very boomer bust. And with this team and how talented it is, I think you just need more of a floor guy than a boomer bust kind of guy. He had Joe Mixon out. He should be back next week. So, you're not having to start Jerome Ford, and you can start, Brian Robinson in the flex, Josh Jacobs, and then Joe Mixon, and then put in Jennings as that third wide receiver.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, yeah, Saints, 2014 to 2016, where he was drafted, coming out as a speedster.
It wasn't that guy. I'll figure it out, because it was like a guy that literally just. It was like during the Brandon Graham era of the Saints. So Drew Brees,
Jimmy
Graham, not Brandon Graham, Jimmy Graham. Okay. Jesus, we suck with names today. Holy
I know,
crap.
this is rough. We're both rusty talking to each other. But no, I mean. Look, Kyler Murray, kind of a confusing day. He has this really incredible week 2, kind of reminding people what he's capable of with 28 fantasy points. Comes into week 3 here and just kind of underperforms in a game a lot of people thought would be high scoring.
Yeah.
I think it probably vastly underperformed the implied point total of that game. But 13-20, really. Kyler Murray just 14 fantasy points there, so a little bit of a rough showing, and you're looking for Murray to have that consistency. You're looking for him to be one of those guys who can consistently get you close to 20 points or more per game. And he's under 15 twice with that big 28 point performance in week 2. So
yeah.
You're looking for these weeks not to happen. You're looking for Murray to be a little bit better than that. But still, great to have some options on the bench that you can utilize when they get healthy, in Mixon's case, and when Jennings can get a spot start. Christian Watson, back to his big play ability, 2 for 2 for 67 yards. So some of these guys are going to be options for you moving forward.
So nothing to panic about for Brian. Nothing to panic about for Brian. 2-1, good way to start through 3 weeks. So nothing really to worry about there. I don't think, at least. So let's go over to our next matchup. Let's keep it rolling here, and that's going to be my matchup actually. And Carlisle Cheddar go to 3-0 as well, 120 to 70.70 to 100.26. I go to 1-2 on the season. Start with Jake's squad first. Kirk Cousins, a very efficient day, 230 yards and a touchdown, but only 11 points. Maybe something to be concerned about. I know Jake is praying for Jordan Love to come back for fantasy, and the Packers, offense runs better with Jordan Love. Can't be said for Saquon Barkley. Huge day here, 17 carries, 147 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Really rubbing my nose in the fact that I faded him after the draft. Alvin Kamara, Alvin Kamara, 26 carries, 87 yards, 40 receiving yards against Philadelphia. So a nice 14-point day. Garrett Wilson, 5 for 9, 33 yards, does salvage his day with a touchdown. Devontae Adams, 4 for 9, 40 yards. Probably pretty disappointing, especially against Carolina. You're expecting a bigger number than that. Jameson Williams, nothing doing. Gets negative yards on a carry. Only 1 for 3 for 9 yards. Another wide receiver seems to be boom or bust. Kyle Pitts, 2 for 5, 59 yards. Had that big play, but that's all doing there. Zach Moss has a nice day, though. 12 carries, 58 yards, and a touchdown. Couple receptions for 39 yards. And then looking on his bench, really nothing doing here. Some usable things. I think Mike Williams is a very interesting player down the line for Jake. But looking at his squad, Kirk Cousins really needs Jordan Love to come back, but survives this one to go to 3-0.
Yeah, and he does it on the backs of those old running backs that we were making fun of, or at least I was. I can't remember if you were, in the draft recap. By old, we mean 29-year-old Alvin Kamara, who is suddenly performing like the heydays, like the couple versions ago Alvin Kamara. He's got, the big 43-point fantasy game in week 2. A couple other very solid games, all double digits. He is your running back 2 in overall statistics after 3 weeks. And then Saquon Barkley. I mean, he has been equally incredible, if not better. 2 30-point fantasy weeks and a 15 in week 2 against Atlanta. He is your number 1 running back in the league. So Jake here just with the 1 and the 2 at the running back position. Sure, it gets a little bit thin there's not that amazing wide receiver right now on this team that's a first or second round type value. You got Garrett Wilson, who had his best game of the season, but still just 11 fantasy points. So definitely some good news that these older aging running backs are staying healthy, putting up major points, but you hope to get a little bit more throughout the rest of the lineup for Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's the question here? I mean, nothing really too concerning here. I would say Jameson Williams versus Mike Williams going forward. Who would you rather have out of those two?
Jameson.
Why?
I just think he's got a higher ceiling. I think he's proven in that high-flying Detroit Lions offense that didn't have a great week in week 3, but we expect will have a lot of great weeks with Jared Goff tossing tons of passes and the dynamic rushing attack that helps to keep the defenses honest. So I think he just presents a lot more. He's on a better team. I think he'll just have more upside as the season moves forward.
I kind of agree with that. I just think it's a lot closer than that. Mike Williams still dealing with the injury, starting to get back into form here. He's only at 45% snap percentage. I expect that to go up as he gets more comfortable with Aaron Rodgers and the offense. Not a lot showing so far, 0, 2, and 4, but I do think that he might be a valuable flex piece, starting like week 7, 8, really getting a roll, getting everything figured out in that offense.
I put some thought into this, and I looked a couple things up.
Okay.
When it comes to, let me take another look here at this week for Jake. Yeah. So Mike Williams, Alan Lazard is $11 million player, and Mike Williams is a $10 million player. So I think people are just assuming that now that Mike Williams is back, he's going to work his way up into being the very clear number 2. Lazard, in addition to his history with Aaron Rodgers, the clear connection that they still have to veterans of the league that have very good rapport, who have done it together more than anybody else in the league, probably, or at least a lot of people. I just think he could be equally as effective as Mike Williams throughout the season.
I just think there are better days. I don't think it's gonna be this bad for Mike Williams. I think I think he's more talented than Alan Lazard. Alan Lazard is kind of like one of those weird ones where it's like he does really well with Aaron Rodgers, but then like if you put him on another team, he got benched last year. I mean, he was inactive last year. So, does that trend continue? I just think Mike Williams is, when he's on the field, I mean, injuries are a concern with him, but when he's on the field, he's the more talented player. He's that big body wide receiver that, none of the other two really wide receivers are. Alan Lazard and Garrett Wilson are kind of those small, shifty kind of guys. So I think just better days ahead for Mike Williams, and I'll be interested to see how he integrates into this offense going forward. But let's go over to the losing side here. That's me, of course. Now 1-2 on the season, 100.26 points. Jaden Daniels, hey, looking great. 21 for 23, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, and does run the ball in for an additional touchdown as well. Jordan Mason filling in for Christian McCaffrey. 19 carries, 77 yards. Doesn't get in the end zone. Doesn't get a lot of involvement in the passing attack, which is kind of concerning for me. Tony Pollard, nothing doing against the Green Bay Packers. 6 carries, 14 yards. Really negative game script in that one. They were behind the entire game, so a really dud there for Tony Pollard. Chris Olave, 6 for 6, 86 yards and a touchdown in the loss against Philadelphia. Mike Evans, 2 for 3, 17 yards. Nothing doing against Patrick Surtain. They're in Denver, shadowing him the entire game. Malik Neighbors, 8 for 12, 78 yards and a touchdown. Did attempt a pass in this one as well for 24 points on the day. Trey McBride, who was in concussion protocol, 3 for 6, 25 yards. The tight end graveyard continues to happen. Samaje Perine, 6 for 25, 3 for 4, 15. Nothing really doing there. Daniel Carlson also as well. He couldn't miss a field goal against the Ravens, but decides to miss one in this one. 0 for 1 there, and Tampa Bay's defense getting torched by Denver. But on my bench, some good news, I would guess you could say. Brock Purdy has a 25-point game. Deontay Johnson has a 22-point game with Andy Dalton, and Quentin Johnson just catches another touchdown as well. Looking at my squad, it's looking like at each position, it's very Jekyll and Hyde. It's very good and then real disappointing. Good, then real disappointing. And it doesn't seem like my team can get on the same page just in 1 week to really secure me my second victory.
I
go ahead.
I agree with you. I mean, I think there are more positive signs here than red flags, for sure, in my opinion. I mean, a lot of these guys are just guys that had kind of their off day, and you said it, when so far this season, you've had guys like Chris Olave who kind of got slower out of the gate. He's starting to heat up, but you've also got guys here in week 3 that are having, their worst performance of the week. 6 carries for Tony Pollard, not enough volume. Jordan Mason, 19 for 77, nice game, but doesn't get into the end zone in a matchup that they thought they were going to win there in San Francisco, possibly by multiple scores. So just 9 points. Mike Evans, Denver had Baker's number in this one, 2.7 fantasy points, I believe. He might have been shadowed by their excellent, is it
Patrick
Pat
Surtain.
Surtain there in
Yeah.
Denver? So, I'm sure he got Surtain in that one.
Yep.
And Trey McBride, I still think he has as good a shot as anybody in these struggling tight ends to sort of exercise their demons just like he did in week 2. And we already talked about it was a down week for Kyler and the Cardinals. So they certainly will bounce back, and he'll be back at the top of fantasy league tight end rankings in week 4 against the Commanders, who really struggle,
Right.
or are supposed to struggle. They played well last night, but I expect Trey McBride to bounce back next week.
If he plays, he's in concussion protocol, so that's
In concussion protocol.
interesting there. My last thoughts on here is, I'm playing Deontay Johnson next week. I think you have to after seeing 14 targets. Enrico Dowdle, just something kind of interesting, kind of in the same lane that you were talking about with Bucky Irving. It seems like he's starting to wrestle that job away from Ezekiel Elliott. I'm pretty sure he had his highest snap total of the season, almost to 50%. I think that continues. It's just how bad is that running attack for Dallas? Is he even going to be worth it? I mean, I'm going to have to use him at some point when these bye weeks come up, but it seems like he's starting to get that job away from old man Elliott there in Dallas. So just a weird week.
Ask you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you 3. I have 3 sort of questions for you, and I'll try to keep them quick.
All right.
First of all, so you've got Jaden Daniels playing out of his mind the other night. You've got Brock Purdy with a pretty solid game, 3 touchdowns in a loss.
Yep.
There in San Francisco. You've got the Juwan Jennings suddenly becoming, potentially a really talented, high volume guy for that team. How are you feeling about these quarterbacks? And is it obvious that Jaden Daniels is a must start over Purdy at this point?
I wouldn't say must start, but I'm starting. It's kind of hard to say. It's like not a must start, but I'm starting him over Brock Purdy. So just with the rushing ability, I think the floor is a lot higher than with Brock Purdy. I just have a bad feeling that this, against the Ravens last year, we had that 3-pick day or 4-pick day. I think that's coming just with the amount of talent that they've lost on offense. I just think Jaden Daniels is the safer option to play with this rushing ability. Runs one in here, has 12 carries. If you can get 12 carries out of your quarterback, that's just like icing on the cake. So, but again, he threw 21 to 23. I mean, his completion percentage was the rookie record on Monday night. So, I think I'm sticking with him for now, and just hope that he stays healthy because he runs and he doesn't like to slide. So, interesting there.
All right, and last question. There's a 2-part kind of. I'm going to combine my 2 questions and ask you one, but it's a tough one. Are you ready for a tough question here?
Okay.
Like I'm going to be very
Yeah.
I'm not going to go easy on you. Okay, so I'm trying to think. There's a Blue Streak reference there, and I don't remember what it is. No, okay.
I'm good for it. I think that's what.
No, not quite. The emergence of Deontay Johnson, 22 fantasy points. Yeah. Andy Dalton making him fantasy relevant again. A guy that you liked, I believe, coming out of the draft. That you had him on your roster, and the excitement of having him emerge to be able to slot into the flex role very easily for you, and then any potential regret. No regrets, right, as the tattoo says. Samaje Perine, a guy you picked up for $41, the second most of any player this year. And also Quentin Johnson, who I believe went for quite a bit.
20, I think.
21, yeah. So a good portion of your budget blown for 2 guys who, unless buys come early for you, you may not be playing them here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not concerned about it yet. I was listening to a pod today where they were saying, Samaje Perine got to Kansas City late. He might not have the full implementation of the playbook yet. Carson Steele wasn't that impressive. I mean, he did have 17 carries for around 70 yards. I think that his appeal is just going to grow as the season goes on, as he gets more plays in the playbook. In terms of Quentin Johnson, I mean, all this man does is catch touchdowns. I mean, he had 80% snap count. He only had 2 targets, but has 3 touchdowns on the year, and he's that big target. He seems to have his drop issues handled, and what's appearing to be a competent offense there in LA. So I'm not regretting it yet. Maybe spending a little too much on Samaje Perine, but as you know, running backs that have starting ability come at a premium, and I didn't want to miss out on that when my next best option right now is Rico Dowdle with Raheem Mostert being out. So not regretting it yet. Maybe spend a little too much, but any player on that high-powered offense, I think is worth spending a little money on. Okay. So let's go over to our next matchup. That is going to be Scott's matchup with Alex. So Scott goes to 1-2, his first win on the season, 118.02 for the Westminster Wonder Boys, defeating Alex 0-3 now, 90.50. But let's start with Scott. Josh Allen looking and doing Josh Allen things. Throws for 4 touchdowns, 263 through the air. Also adds 6 carries for 44 yards. Bijan Robinson, 16 carries, 31, but does salvage his day with a touchdown. Rashad White, 6 carries, 17 yards, and we're going to talk about him a little bit. 5 for 6, 18 yards there. Michael Pittman continues to just, not over 5 points yet in fantasy this year. Doesn't really have that good connection with Anthony Richardson. 4 for 5, 36 yards. Definitely draft capital. Spent a lot on him, and not really really in return to investment right now. Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry, 4 for 6, 100 yards and a touchdown. Really, really nice catch to be on the back of the end zone to really salt that game away for the Commanders against Cincinnati. Jared Jeudy, 4 for 7, 27 yards, does get that 2-point conversion. Sam Laporta, 2 for 2, 36 yards. The tight ends, I think was he the first? No, because Kelsey was the first tight end who went off the board. But high draft capital, no return there for Sam Laporta as of yet. Zach Charbonnet, 18 carries, 91 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Took my advice from last week to start him while Kenneth Walker is out. You're welcome, Scott. Looking on his bench, Keon Coleman catches a touchdown, but no real volume there. And you're hoping he's going to be a little bit more involved in the offense when they score 47 points. And Tyler Lockett, 8 targets. You like to see that, 46 yards. So still a little bit relevant there in Seattle with even Jackson Smith and Jigba being there, and DJ Metcalf may be a usable piece in the future. Scott's now 1-2. But let's talk about 2 players that were drafted very high, but haven't really returned. I'm going to say return investment yet. Michael Pittman. How concerned are we about this? Because, like I said, not over 5 points yet, or not over 6 points yet. Playing all the snaps and everything, but Anthony Richardson is not looking like that quarterback that was being drafted so high. Really inefficient, makes the flashy plays, but doesn't make the consistent plays for his wide receiver core.
Yeah, I'm worried. In addition to the kind of generally it's low volume for him for the most part, generally for a quarterback. Throws a lot of deep passes. I heard a fantasy analyst today describe him as the pitcher that comes out of the minor leagues with just one pitch. He's got a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, and that's about it. Like, that seems to be the situation there for the Colts quarterback. But Pittman certainly has suffered, and there are other guys there that are kind of like maybe not fantasy reliable from week to week, they do affect the game for the Colts. They do, a guy they like, Adonai Mitchell, who hasn't really put it together, but they're
Yeah.
high on him. Alec Pierce there, Josh Downs coming back here from injury. Like, there's a number
Yeah.
of names that have
It's
been
just a
relevant
mess.
enough.
It's just a mess in
Yeah.
there too. It's like you can see any one of those players popping off, but it's just like, when do you know to play that player? I could see Josh Downs catching 2 touchdown passes in a week. Alex Pierce has done it. I could see Michael Pittman doing it, but can Michael Pittman really distance himself from those other wide receivers? I don't know, and
Yeah.
that just might be because of the Anthony Richardson quarterback play right now.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the major what ifs. I see a lot of what ifs on this team right now. Obviously, Josh Allen, Bijan Robinson. We talked about it last week, didn't we? Say this is the team we're watching, right? If you have the top two at top quarterback, top running back, Bijan and Josh Allen. I don't know if they still are, but
And miss the playoffs.
and missed the playoffs.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about the wide receivers, but the ifs, like if Sam Laporta plays like we know he is capable of playing, if Zach Charbonnet is able to get more playing time, if Kenneth Walker continues to remain hurt, if Rashad White somehow doesn't lose carries to Bucky Irvin, which he
Yeah.
certainly already is,
Yeah.
and it's not trending well for him right now. And if Terry McLaurin can have the same magic that Jaden Daniels showed in the NFL for the first time last night, then that's another question. So just a ton of questions for this team. It could be very good for Scott, or it could be very bad.
Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to talk about with Scott's team was Rashad White. Um, you know, kind of looking like, we talked about Samaje Perine. It looks like that's going to be his destination here in a minute, with Bucky Irving doing the early down work, him being the third down back. I think he drafted him in the second round. I
Hmm.
think. Maybe you could fact check me on that, but it was the second or third round. So, you know, draft capital, and he's already losing his job in week 3 is not a good sign for Scott. He needs him to be
Yeah.
involved.
End of the second.
Yeah, so he needs him to be way more involved, needs to be way more efficient than he currently is. Or that is a big hole there in, or running back 2, because Zach Charbonnet is not always going to be the number 1 guy. Kenneth Walker is coming back, and they like Kenneth Walker. So, who are you going to play there if you can't play Zamir White? So it's
No,
just a big, big question mark for Scott there.
for sure.
But let's go to our low score of the week. Now 0-3. That would be Alex with the Owings Mills Ogres, 90.50. Going through the squad, CJ Stroud. That's a weird game. Minnesota looks like they have a legit defense, though. 20 for 31, 215 yards, and a touchdown, 2 interceptions. Nothing doing on the ground. Jahmyr Gibbs, 16 carries, 83 yards. Does get a touchdown through the air, I think. It's kind of listed kind of weird. Ezekiel Elliott, as we're talking about, only 3 carries in this one, 6 yards. Does catch 1 ball. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 7 for 8, 75 yards and a touchdown. So good day for him. DJ Moore, 8 for 10, 78 yards. So also a good day as well. Zay Flowers, only 3 for 4, 20 yards. And I guess for most of the time, it was a negative game script for him against Dallas as they're up in a big lead. Dallas Goedert, the one bright spot in tight end this week, 10 for 11, 170 yards in their win against New Orleans. Tank Dell, 5 for 6, 62 yards. Justin Tucker missing another field goal, does have 4 extra points, and Dallas scoring negative. Looking at his bench, Darnell Mooney, 8 for 8, 66 yards. He's kind of an interesting player to keep an eye on. And Rashad Bateman catches a touchdown. Looking at Alex's squad, I mean, we gave him a D for a reason, I would say.
Yeah.
He's 0-3 now, and Ezekiel Elliott appears to be losing his job. So where he can't really afford him to lose the job with Nick Chubb not coming back for probably 6 more weeks, I think is the general consensus. So 0-3, really struggling through the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, you almost wonder if you're Alex, do you start talking to teams that are 3-0, Jake or me, or two
Is
and
this a
one that
hint?
or 2-1 teams that really kind of like the direction that their team is going. And do you see if you can get Nick Chubb, like give away Nick Chubb for a just a mid-tier, you know, running back to slot in there as the RB2 for this team? I feel like you could probably shop Chubb for that purpose and get somebody who's at least usable. I mean, you're going to get this is what we talked about coming out of the draft, waiting so long to take a second running back. And we were like, Zeke Elliott? Really? 3 for 6? 6 yard? Like, not good
No.
at all. So I'd be looking to see if I could make a move because unfortunately for Alex, he can't keep this up. He's 0-3. He needs wins now. He cannot wait for Chubb to maybe come back and maybe be full strength in the middle of the season. Alex might be already out of it by then.
Yeah, I mean, just like, Dallas's defense drafted high, -4. They don't look the same. Justin Tucker drafted high. Again, maybe you could have took a stab on one of these running back committee, people like like a Bucky Irving or a Rico Dattle, instead of taking Justin Tucker. Justin Tucker does not look the same, and he's what rank kicker is he? He's 19. Like you can find that on the waiver wire. Um, just question marks all around. Nothing much doing for him, and even C.J. Stroud, disappointing day. Now the 16th ranked quarterback. Like you can't have him be the 16th ranked quarterback where he was drafted. So not to be bleak, but you might be right. His season may be over unless he makes a drastic move, spends a little bit of that money if there's an injury or something like that to a running back, and he can get the backup, or makes a trade to right this ship because right now it looks bad. It's bad, and I think Alex is lining up for a lot of shotgun beers in the near future if he doesn't correct this with some player additions.
Yep, and one of two players with his entire budget right now, his entire $100 budget.
All right.
So
So let's go over to. It's going to be Charlie and Tom. So the Reisterstown Rockets win this one. Charlie goes to 2-1, 117.78 to 96.88. Tommy goes to 1-2, the Finksburg Freaks. Let's go over to Charlie's squad. Derek Carr, he comes back down to earth a little bit. Only 7 points on the day, 142 yards, a touchdown, and interception. Jonathan Taylor, 23 carries, 110 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I feel like he's the most slept on running back in the league. Where no one really talks about how good he is. I mean, he had the rushing title a couple years ago, but he got injured. He had some holdout stuff. I think he's kind of been forgotten how good he's been. But he shows it here against Chicago. Derrick Henry, I was a week too late with this call, but 25 carries, 151 yards, 2 touchdowns. Really looks dominant. Once he gets to that second level, watch out because he can run for a very, very long time. Nico Collins, 4 for 10, not very efficient, only 86 yards. Jackson Smith and Jigba, also only 3 for 3, 39 yards. Devontae Smith comes out of the game in this one with a really brutal hit. He might be out for a little bit. 7 for 10, 79 yards. Dalton Kincaid does get in the end zone. That's positive for any tight end right now with 11.6 points. J.K. Dobbins comes back down a little bit, 15 carries, 44 yards, catches 3 balls. And looking on Charlie's bench, Alan Lazard, who we talked about a little bit, does get another touchdown. Jacoby Myers also gets a touchdown here, 7 for 9, 62 yards and a touchdown. And Mike Gesicki, 4 for 5, 47 yards. So options to play on the bench. He is going to be missing Devontae Smith. Which one of these two players are you playing for Devontae Smith next week? Alan Lazard or Jacoby Myers?
I think I'm going Alan Lazard. I kind of alluded to that earlier. I they're he's being paid the same as Mike Williams, so I certainly think he could be just as valuable. So I think I'd lean Lazard there for sure.
Okay. they play Denver next week, so you would guess Sertan would be on Garrett Wilson, so maybe he'll have some opportunities there. What else here for Charlie? This is kind of like, very running back heavy. The running backs need to carry him to victory, and then after Nico Collins, it's a lot of dart throws with Devontae Smith now being out. Smith and Jigba, Jacoby Myers and Alan Lazard, Leggett there also. They're in Carolina, but just a lot of kind of, I don't want to say question marks, but you're going to need to be a pretty savvy owner to try to figure out who's the best option to play week in and week out while you do have these injury concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say, though, that, like, for a team that just lost Tua for an indefinite amount of time, Charlie's team here,
Yep.
like, I just look at this team and I'm like, I can get on board with this. I mean, the Saints, rough week, we talked about it. I think there's a very good chance that they, got figured out after a couple weeks, and we'll make the adjustments next week to be the offense more like week 1 or week 2 than their 12-point performance in week 3. And I just think there's a lot of, Taylor and Henry, man, they're going to be good more than they're bad. And when they're good, they can both be very good. As you said, Taylor, not far removed from like being the number 1 fantasy draft pick just a few years ago in leagues all over the place. So Nico Collins, I still really like. 10 targets in this game, is the number 6 receiver in fantasy. I really like him. Tank Dell seems to not be as big of a threat right now for fantasy points to Nico. Dalton Kincaid, still as good a chance as any, again, to be a top 5 tight end, kind of in that category of, highly drafted players that are just not having a great start to the year. So I just think there's enough floor, there's enough ceiling. J.K. Dobbins, this was a rough one for him, but he's definitely outperformed his ADP by several rounds thus far in the season.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's enough here to sort of absorb the loss of Tua for who knows how long.
Yeah, but like we did say, Tua's great when it's warm and the weather's nice, but once it starts getting that December weather and he has to start playing in that, his production does fall. So it might just be worth it just to, even if he does come back, just to hold on to Derek Carr and, play
100%.
him when, those times come around.
100%.
But 2-1, looking good there. But let's go to the Tom's team, who is now 1-2, 96.88. Patrick Mahomes, I feel like we talk about this every week. Another disappointing day, even in the win. Hasn't broken 20 points yet. 26-39, 217, 2 touchdowns, an interception. It's kind of weird that, like, we're talking about how good Rashid Rice is, and he's not really following suit in terms of fantasy production. Breece Hall, 16 carries, 54 yards, and a touchdown. Travis Etienne, 11 carries, 68 yards. Does get involved in the passing attack. DK Metcalf, 4 for 6, 104 yards, and a touchdown. Brian Thomas, 5 for 9, 48 yards. Xavier Worthy, 4 points on the day. He seems to be like that gadget kind of player where you're really going to have those boom weeks, but you're really going to have these type of weeks as well. And only 4 points on the day. Mark Andrews, I don't know what's going on with Mark Andrews. 33% snap count. 33.
And I think he ran 6 routes, but I think they said 2 of them were blocking routes, so really 4 routes, true routes.
So T. Higgins, 5 points. Brandon Aubrey had a 65-yard field goal, so that's always good. Looking on his bench, he does have Carson Steele. He did get 17 carries, so definitely usable. Didn't really do. I mean, what's 1772? 4.2 yards per carry, so pretty good. But Alexander Madison being involved in the passing game and vulturing touchdowns away from Zamir White. What are we talking about with Tom? Let's talk about Mark Andrews, because we were just talking about him. I mean, is it panic time? Is it time to, start looking on the waiver wire and start starting someone more than Mark Andrews? Or are you just kind of stuck with him for the season and just hope that he rights the ship?
I've got him in another league, so I can
Me as
speak
well.
to this pretty well for myself here. I'm not ready to just like wave bye-bye to Mark Andrews in this offense with his contract, with as dominant of a player as we know he is. I think we need him. I mean, we're 1-2 and he's been not really doing anything. So, you know, I think we could get him involved. I think it would do ourselves a favor to get the guy that you've recognized as like one of the best tight ends in the game and paid him accordingly, that you just continue to not use him. This offense seems like it's going to be very game script dependent. We just haven't seen the game script that Mark Andrews is useful, and I'm kind of afraid to know what that is, but I'm not ready to trust a waiver wire tight end at this point in time because they will just hit 20 points, you'll pick them up, and they'll break your mind the
Yeah.
next week with a 1.5 or something.
Well, I mean, the next 3 weeks, you have pretty good offenses that are going against the Ravens defense, so there should be point score with Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Washington. I think I think these next 3 weeks are really going to tell if it's a bust season for Mark Andrews or if he's going to right the ship. Because if he doesn't do it in these next 3 weeks, with they should be in neutral game script, they shouldn't really blow out any of these teams. Um, uh, he could be much better, but if he's not much, if it's more of the same, I think that's when you really have to have a tough conversation and figure out what to do at your tight end position, because you can't have 0 points out of any position, but especially tight end, you can't have 0 points with where you drafted Mark Andrews. So just very concerning for Tom, and being 1-2 doesn't help the situation at all. So just a kind of an interesting question and a thing to follow. But I'll make a bold prediction.
Okay.
Mark Andrews catches his first touchdown pass of the season next week against Buffalo.
Now, I mean, is that really that bold? Is he just?
I think it's bold.
I'd say I don't know. I'd say I look at it as he's absolutely
well, I'm
due,
pretty
and it's the
horrible
most
at these
obvious
bold
thing in the
predictions,
world.
so I'm like 0 for 3 so far. So I had
Okay.
Brandon Ayuk last week, so that didn't turn out too well. So
Hmm.
he'll probably score another 0. Sorry, Tom. But let's go over.
Well,
Yeah.
I wanna do one thing. So I did write down all the waiver wire. I was really fascinated because just generally, we're kind of halfway. It might be a good time just for me to say like this. The reason I'm bringing these things up is the spending seems really high to me. Like I wasn't expecting. We haven't gotten to Isaiah Likely yet, but to go for $69, or there's a $31 player on here,
And he's
Alexander
unusable.
Madison,
He's
for
unusable.
Tom.
Isaiah Likely's unusable.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
30 points that we'll talk about later for Hunter Henry, 41 for P. Ryan, who's one of 4 running backs right now in the mix for Kansas City, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming back potentially.
Potentially.
I don't know. I think a lot of these, and Tom is like the worst offender, not worst offender, but he spent the most money. Madison for 31 after week 1. Tyler Johnson for 12 after week 2. Oh, I'm sorry, after week 1. Can you really use him? No, I don't think so. He's like option number 4 in that offense, even with those injured guys. Um, Carson Steele for 26. Again, one of 4 running backs there. And Jalen Naylor for 5. Like, to me, Jalen Naylor for 5 is like the best value. The other ones seem just like huge overpays.
Wait, Tom has Jordan Naylor? Or what's his name?
I think he does.
I don't see
No,
him.
maybe not. Oh, I must have gotten that wrong. Okay, so
Apologies, Tom.
I take that back. Somebody else did that. I wrote the wrong name down. Right?
It's his first week
There's no
back.
Jalen. Yeah. But anyway, you catch my drift. Like,
Yeah.
really expensive players this early in the season, and Tom all of a sudden he's 1-2, and he has $26 left.
Do you know why I think this is? because of Dustin last year. He hit on
with Puka and
Puka
Kyron.
and Kyron. And another
Yeah.
one, too. I think there was 3 players that maybe they weren't as good as that, but,
Yeah.
taking a chance on one of these players,
Early.
could win you
Yeah.
the league if they really turn
Sure.
out. So, I think that's just kind of what's in everyone's mind. Isaiah Likely has that first week. You're thinking, oh man, he could be the number 1 tight end this year if it continued.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be that way right now, but I think it was just everyone saw what Dustin did last year, and the value that he got from it, that they were just like, we're going to spend early and often and hopefully hit on one of these. So that's just my thoughts on that. But yeah.
Oh, sorry. You know what? I think Naylor. Yeah, he picked up Naylor for 5, but dropped him 2 days ago. Right before catching his 3rd touchdown of the year. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay.
So just throwing away $5. That's fine.
That's right.
All right. So let's go over to our next matchup of the day, and that's going to be the Battle of the Hugheses. Hughes. Orchard Beach Ovaries versus the Pasadena Peleg. 112.76 to 92.98. Josh goes 2-1. Sarah is now 2-1. So both 2-1. Let's start with Sarah's squad. Jalen Hurts, turnover city it seems. 1 interception, 1 fumble loss, only 10 points on the day. Devin Achane, 11 carries, 30 yards. Just kind of a weird day. That Seattle defense seems to be legitimate. I know they were playing against a backup quarterback, but that doesn't really stop your skill position players when they have their hands on the ball. So seems like that's going to be a tough matchup for teams going forward. Only 7 points, 7.3 points for Devin Achane. David Montgomery, I forgot David Montgomery's name. 23 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Just very steady Eddie, it seems. Always seems to get in the end zone, gets 20-plus carries every week. Good on Sarah for seeing that. CeeDee Lamb loses a fumble in this one, 4 for 7, 67 yards. Really not living up to the hype right now for arguably the number 1 wide receiver drafted through 3 weeks. Stephon Diggs, 10 for 12, 94 yards. So very much involved in that offense. Scores a nice 14.92 points. George Pickens, 5 for 7, 57 yards for 8.2 points. Hunter Henry comes back down to earth, 2 for 3, 9 points. Shakir here, 6 for 6, 72 yards and a touchdown in the blowout against Jacksonville. And the Jets defense scores 18, only 7 sacks, 3 points allowed. Looking at her bench, nothing really much doing. Maybe Zach Ertz, 5 for 5, 38 yards. Maybe that's someone that you're playing the matchups there with Hunter Henry versus Zach Ertz. Not great, but tight end is a points desert right now, so not much options there. But my question for you is Devon Achane, 19 points with Tua, 26 points week 2, 7 points with Skylar Thompson. Skylar Thompson's probably going to be out. Do you fade him at all with Mostert probably coming back this week and now on their probably 3rd string quarterback? I mean, is he really going to be a top 10 running back by season's end?
I think he will. I think he's just too talented, and I think they're going to just rely on him in that offense to be the playmaker. They're going to try to get Tyreek Hill the ball, but it's often going to be frustrating trying to do that, and Achane is going to be the more reliable target and the more reliable, the most reliable running back in that system right now. So 11 for 30, not so efficient against a really good Seattle defense. I think better days are certainly ahead for Achane. I sort of was thinking more to his utilization in week 2. After Tua left in the first week.
Right.
26 fantasy points on 22 rushing attempts. So I see his results probably being closer to that than 11 for 30.
Okay, I don't like to hear that as a Mostert owner in 2 leagues, so do not like that. But I'm just a little concerned about that entire offense. I don't know, because it's like you can't really stack the box against them because you can't play, one on one with the outside wide receivers. But I feel like they're just gonna make if it's Tyler Huntley, beat them. Like they're just gonna say, okay, you gotta beat us. We're gonna bracket cover Tyreek, and then we're just gonna play man with everybody else and load the box. And I'm just not sure that. I think they're gonna run the ball a lot more, but I don't know if they're just gonna say, hey, HN, you're gonna have 30 carries now. I don't think that's how they run this offense. So I'm just a tiny bit concerned. He'll have the work. If defenses if they know what's coming, it's kind of hard to be productive. You have to be unpredictable in the NFL offense to be successful. But anything else on Sarah's squad?
No, I just think that Hurts is not going to be this bad. He's going to get it together. Slow start to the season for him a little bit, but still, I expect to be a top 5 quarterback the rest of the way. Still, I mean, I still believe in his talent. I believe in that team. I don't necessarily know how sustainable Saquon's production is at that level. I think Hurts is due for some, especially once he gets AJ Brown back next week, but more likely the week after, if I had to guess right now. I think he'll be better. I think HN will still have a high enough floor that he'll be able to serve his role in the starting lineup for this team. CeeDee Lamb will be better. He was yelping on the sideline. I think we're in for a squeaky wheel sort of game
Yep.
for CeeDee Lamb very, very soon. One of the, a la Jamar Chase this week. Khalil Shakir is a nice little flex piece here. 6 for 6, 72 yards and a touchdown. It does seem like he is going to be the highest ceiling wide receiver maybe for the Bills, and that ceiling is still pretty. It's not sky high, but I think he is just the favorite target right now for
The
Josh
ceiling
Allen.
is a mud hut high, I guess you would say. It's not high.
I guess you could say that, right? But whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
just the thing with Jalen Hurts, he's
yeah,
turned the ball over a little too much right now.
yeah,
2 fumbles in the first game, a fumble in this game. He's thrown 4 interceptions through 3 weeks. He needs to cut down on that to really boost up his points.
yep. All right,
All right.
pick a tight end for next week. Zach Ertz at Arizona after
Revenge
5
game.
targets. Revenge game, 4 or more targets in his last 3 games, or Hunter Henry, $30 waiver acquisition. After his 14-point explosion in week 2, he goes 2 for 3. I'm sorry, 2 catches for 3 yards or 9 yards on 3 targets for 1.9 fantasy points. So Hurts or Henry next week?
I think I'm going with Henry. The Patriots
At
announced
San
that.
Francisco. At San
Yeah.
Francisco.
Well, it's going to be negative game script, so they're going to throw. Patriots announced today that Jacoby Brissett's still going to remain the starter, which I think helps Hunter Henry's value. You don't want Drake May for Hunter Henry's value, I don't believe. And, there's just, this is kind of weird to say, but there's a lot of weapons on Washington's offense that they utilize. And with Jane Daniels, once they get down to that, 5-yard line, he's a threat to running in where, I don't really think Jacoby Brissett's really running anywhere. So I'm going to go with Henry here. Are you writing that down? All right.
No, I was not.
Okay. Let's go over
But we should say
Yeah.
just one more thing. The Jets defense, I mentioned it back in week 1, or maybe it was the draft recap show. Their schedule looks really pretty good. I mean, they've got Denver next, Minnesota. That offense, I guess, has been a little bit better than maybe you thought they'd be. New England is still on the schedule in the first half of the year. Indianapolis is still there, potential for some interceptions. Some tough games on here, but also some ones that they can exploit for a bunch of points. So
Yeah.
I like the Jets defense as a top play here.
Okay, let's go over to Josh's squad here. The losing side now 2-1, 92.98 points for the Pasadena Plague. Anthony Richardson, as we talked about before, 10 for 20, 2 interceptions, 167 yards, only 8 carries as well. You're hoping that he's carrying the ball a little bit more if he's not going to throw that much. Devin Singletary, 16 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Does lose a fumble in their win against Cleveland. Najee Harris, 18 carries, 70 yards, 5 for 5, 16, so a nice day there. Chris Godwin continues to impress, I would say. 6 for 9, 53 yards, and a touchdown. Brandon Ayuk, I said that Brandon Ayuk would have 8 catches for over 100 yards in this one for my bold prediction last week. That did not turn out to be the case. 5 for 10, 48 yards. He just looks rusty. He's dropping balls, running wrong routes. I don't know. It might take a couple of weeks to get him going. Robinson, 7 for 8, 61 yards. Brandon Strange catches a touchdown. That's probably the best thing you can ask for tight ends right now. Looking at his bench, Ray Davis, gets some junk time work, but he's not going to be really anything there while James Cook is healthy. Justice Hill, maybe a little bit of something, but only 5 carries. Does have Isaiah Pacheco and George Kittle hurt right now. George Kittle may be back this week. I don't know exactly. I just want to look this up real quick. They say they hope he gets back to practice, so that's another tight end you can just plug and play and hope to get a touchdown out of. But I guess my question here, let's talk a little bit about Brandon Ayuk. I think all the fantasy managers were wondering, why didn't the Juwan Jennings workload go to Brandon Ayuk? Brandon Ayuk is the more talented player. He's the guy with the big contract. Hasn't gone over 8 points thus far. 60% snaps week 1, 87 week 2, 80 in week 3. And it's going to have a tough matchup this week against the Patriots. They have a shutdown corner as well, Christian Gonzalez. So, Brandon Ayuk. What was my question? I just forgot. Where does he rank for you in terms of, this team? You have to start him, it would appear. No one really else behind him, but can he right the ship? Can he become that top 10 wide receiver? Or is he going to get passed up and kind of be this middling wide receiver 2 or 3 for Josh's squad?
Well, that is the question. I look at this team right now, and
you have to start him.
You have to start him, but I look at this team and I see 2 significant injuries. I see Pacheco out and I see Nakua out. Your first and second round picks for this team. I thought, okay, you were yawning, but I thought it was like oh my God, really? Like you're like surprised face? Yeah, exactly. But it was just a yawn. But still, because I know on the desktop you can't see the IR players, right?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, so but Nakua is on IR,
Yeah.
and Pacheco is out. So he's got both of those guys, his first 2 picks. Ayuk is the make or break player right now, because whenever you have a couple of your top picks, 1 and 2, out for extended periods of time, your goal is to stay 500 until you can get those guys back. And the only way you're going to do that is if some of your lower drafted players, Ayuk, 3rd rounder, you need him to start playing like a 1 or a 2 to make up the difference of losing those 2 guys. You're going to need a guy like Kittle to, be a top 5 tight end. You need guys to step up to fill in for your long-term injuries, your studs that get injured early in the season. So I don't know, Adam, do you think this team has the pieces to stay afloat for another 8 or 9 weeks, maybe for a couple of these guys, at least for Nakua and for Pacheco? It seems to be a similar timetable.
I think the make or break is really Anthony Richardson. You can't have 5 points out of him. You got to get the rushing numbers up. He has to score rushing touchdowns. He's got to stop turning the ball over. He is at 6 interceptions right now. 2 fumbles, but he didn't lose any. So just playing very fast and loose with The football, when it's in his hands, he needs to be better. I mean, he was one of the rising stars in terms of before the draft, and people loved the physical nature that he ran the ball with, and he has a cannon of an arm. But 10 completions, 9 completions in week 1, that's not gonna work for Josh right now. He needs him to be that consistent 20-point player for him to really stay at 500. And if he's like this, then we could really see a star fall for Josh's squad if these 5-point games and the continued turnovers continue for Anthony Richardson.
Like, we could see Joe Flacco at some point, is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Like, if the Colts fall out of it or start to, like, we just saw the Panthers below Bryce Young.
If they're like 3 games below 500 going into week 8 or 9, you could just to try to get him back in it if he keeps turning the ball over like this.
Yeah, it's premature right now, but
correct. And it's just the turnovers are, you can't have that with.
Yeah.
They were 1 play away last year from making the playoffs with Gardner Minshew. So it's like, and it doesn't get, if that nightmare scenario does happen for Josh, it's not much better on the bench with Trevor Lawrence, another guy that turns the ball over way too much. So 2-1 though, so let's give him credit there. Just a lot of scary things on this roster that Josh has to look out for. But let's go over to our last matchup of the day, of the week, and that would be Dustin and Mike. So the Pikesville Pink Pony Club get their first win of the season, 105.18 to 97.96 for Columbia Clown College, now 0-3 on the season. Lamar Jackson had a really nice day, very efficient, 12 for 15, 182 and a touchdown, 14 carries, 87 yards and a touchdown. Ramondre Stevenson, nothing doing, 6 carries, 23 yards, does lose a fumble. I wonder if he was benched after that, I'm not sure. Swift, 13 carries, 20 yards, nothing really doing there as well. Justin Jefferson continues to make Sam Darnold look like the early MVP candidate. 6 for 8, 81 yards and a touchdown in their big win against Houston. Drake London, thank God, one of my picks to do very well is finally turning out okay. 6 for 9, 67 yards and a touchdown, 15-point day. Roma Dunze, very nice day. 6 for 11, 112 yards and a touchdown in their loss against the Colts. Brock Bowers, 3 for 4, 41 yards. Cortland Sutton, no one talks about, but 7-11, 68 yards, getting the volume there in Denver. Let's look at the bench. Braylon Allen, very kind of interesting player. Very interesting. He only gets 8 points in this, but does have 11 carries for 55 yards. But yeah, I mean, he had Kenneth Walker out. He has Keenan Allen out as well. Let's see, what's his question?
And Hollywood Brown on IR.
Is Hollywood Brown even coming back this year?
I did not think so. So
yeah, so something interesting there. Is it too far to say, or is it too bold to say that you should start thinking about starting Braylon Allen over Swift going forward? That Chicago offensive line is so bad. Is so bad.
Yeah. No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's fair. I mean, Allen is kind of just demanding, even with a stud in front of him in Breece Hall, he's demanding carries. He's becoming inevitable. I mean, it was Keaton Mitchell last year, right? Who like you gave him the ball and you saw what talent. I mean, 2 very different players, those two, but both of them come in and just are like make your eyes open. You're forced to look at them. You're forced to give them carries because they are so efficient. 11 for 55, involved in the passing game. He's a big-bodied player. The Jets really like him. A great kind of combo punch between him and Breece Hall. So I really like that. The way he's headed right now.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that's definitely a conversation you need to be having. 13 carries, 20 yards. I mean, DeAndre Swift and that whole Chicago rushing attack is just, not working out right now, and looking at his snap percentage now. First week 70, second week 66, third week 53. He's losing snaps, and you would think that Braylon Allen is really going to start demanding more snaps, maybe putting him into the slot, things like that. He's just too talented of a player to not have on the field for the Jets. So definitely something to look out for Dustin going forward. But does get the win, does get his first win of the season, 1-2. So
and I want
to
give Dustin some props for what I think is the Steal of the Year. We used to give out the Carmack Steal of the Year award back in the ESPN days of this league. Right now, if I were to crown an early season favorite without looking at all the moves that were made, Rome Odunze is right at the top, especially for the fact that he got him for $0, right?
Yeah.
He plays the waiver wire on the in-betweens, the in-between weeks where, somebody drops him in the run of waivers on Wednesday morning and he grabs him late in the week. He comes in like perfect guy to slot into this lineup behind Justin Jefferson and Drake London. You just need him to return value of a 3, and he goes off and puts up a 20-point fantasy game, 6 for 11 for 112 yards. So, really good pickup. I very strongly considered it midweek, but I couldn't feel like I couldn't fit Odunze onto the squad at this time. But Dustin did. Inserted him right into his lineup, and he delivers for a win in week number 3.
So let's go over to Mike's squad. 0-3 now. Time to start panicking, I guess you could say. Looking at his starters, Jared Goff, kind of a preseason kind of sneaky draft pick. Hasn't really been, hasn't lived up to expectations. Hasn't gone over 15 points thus far. 18 for 23, 199 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Aaron Jones, though, 19 carries, 102 yards, does get in the end zone through the air. James Conner, really hard time against that Detroit front 7, 9 carries, 17 yards. Tyreek Hill, nothing doing, 3 for 5, 40 yards. Marvin Harrison gets in the end zone again, so stacking weeks for Marvin Harrison Jr., good to see for that Arizona offense. Christian Kirk has a comeback from his very disappointing beginning of the season. Does get 10 targets, 79 yards. I'm just kind of wondering how much of a game script that's going to be each week, getting 10 targets there. Travis Kelce, I would say that Travis Kelce is probably the second most disappointing tight end thus far. Maybe him and Sam Laporta, and then Mark Andrews is obviously number 1. But, he was the first overall tight end drafted and only getting 5 points. Seems like he's old. It seems like he's kind of checked out as well. I mean, he has the podcast with his brother. He does, he's with, as everyone knows, he's with Taylor Swift. It just kind of seems like he has one foot out the door in terms of the NFL. 4 for 5, only 30 yards. Cam Akers doing the spot start for Joe Mixon, 9 for 21. Does get in the end zone through the air. Looking at his bench, Dak Prescott has a good game. Was really atrocious to start, but ends up with almost 30 points on the day. And Austin Eckler, who I said I liked, 3 carries, 35 yards and a touchdown, did get knocked out of this one with a concussion, so he is also in concussion protocol as
on a short week.
Well, on a short week. Do they play on Thursday?
I believe they do.
Against Arizona? Okay. Yeah, so my question for you is, Dak Prescott plays the Giants next week.
Yeah.
Jared Goff plays Seattle next week. Who are you starting?
Oh, sorry. They do not play. They play Sunday, but short week in that they played Monday night. So a little bit shorter of a week for the Commanders. Who am I starting? Which quarterback? Probably Dak.
Yeah.
Probably Dak. I mean, it's nice to be able to have those two options so you can kind of pick and choose the matchups. I think I just like Dak's fourth quarter. I like the urgency that the Cowboys played with, and that was even without CeeDee Lamb producing. So it seems like they got a little taste of maybe what they could be against the Ravens in the fourth quarter, and I look for them to sort of continue some of that momentum. I look for a big game from CeeDee Lamb coming up, 2-touchdown type of a day. So I think Dak will be a good bet to bounce back.
Yeah, I mean, I always have a kind of a weird thing about drafting two quarterbacks around the same area, just because I'm always really bad at trying to figure out who to start and who not to start. I'd rather just have one ride or die, leave it at that, and live with the results. But this is one of these things. Jared Goff's just been really struggling. I think with the ineffective running game that Dallas does have, I think you have to start Dak week in and week out because they're just going to throw the ball. And that defense doesn't look the same like it did last year. So I think they're going to be in a lot of high scoring games where Dak has to throw the ball 50 times. So I think that is a good call there. But that is the show.
Not yet. I got to ask you about the biggest waiver wire acquisition by dollar figures of the season. $69 to Mike's Clown Show.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Is this team truly a clown show, and is the lead act Isaiah Likely on the bench for 69 big ones after week one?
Yeah, I just don't know. I would love to interview Mike to see what the thought process was after week one. Did he just think that he was going to be Mark Andrews, like, going forward? And, like, it's interesting to try to figure out what the thought process, because $69, that's a lot for a tight end that only played 66% of the snaps and has Mark Andrews on the team. And this is a team that we watch, week in and week out. He seems to be just a player. I mean, he's good, but what kind of opportunities does he get? He's not really a blocker. So that kind of limits his time on the field as well. So, $69, that's a lot of money. But if he thought that he was going to take that Mark Andrews role, it kind of makes more sense. But right now, 3 points, 0.9 points, you can't even put him in the starting lineup right now.
Yeah. So Brian and Jake should be thanking Mike for outbidding them. Again, Mike, $69, the winner of Isaiah Likely winner, ? Brian, $33, and Jake, $15. So money well not spent by Brian and Jake getting outbid by Mike for Likely.
Yeah. It's like Mike bought a stock at its highest and then it crashed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just very unfortunate for fantasy and the Ravens, to be honest, because if we had Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely being dominant, that would be like the Gronk, Aaron Hernandez days there in New England. So just disappointing, but still a lot of season left, a lot of games to play. You're not out of it if you're 0-3. You can really turn it around with some lucky weeks and some big production from your star players. But that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for tuning in. I think I'll see most of you at the Renaissance Festival this weekend on Saturday. So that should be fun. Any final thoughts, Patrick?
I will be there as well with the other half, and his other half, his twin brother and fiance are coming down, and a couple other friends too. So we'll be there as well. I think Daniel bought a cheap costume for me to wear, and I don't know about it. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. It may or may not be close-ish to what Jordan Westberg was wearing yesterday. Not as skimpy. And by the way, good-looking man Jordan Westberg is. But no, I don't have anything else. Good luck in week 4.
Yeah.
Top two teams, Jake and I from the championship game last year, the only 3-0 teams left.
And we can look at just the matchups real quick for week 4. I go against Mike, so 1-2 versus 0-3. Jake goes against Dustin, the 3-0 versus the 1-2. Alex goes against Sarah, so 0-3 versus 2-1. Charlie goes against Josh, 2-1 versus 2-1. Scott goes against Brian, 1-2 versus 2-1, and you go against Tom, 3-0 versus 1-2. So good luck to everyone in week 4, and we will see you again next week. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and your support. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.